Well, creativity is it's a function of intelligence, and there are three related terms here. The reason I'm saying it this way is that there are lots of misconceptions about creativity. I should say, just by the way in advance, is that creativity has not always been my thing. It's not that I, kind of was born into Liverpool thinking, one of these days, I'm going to sort this whole creativity nonsense out. The whole stretch of my life where I didn't think about it at all, and if I did think about it, I wasn't very interested in it. But you become interested in things which attract your attention at the right time and in the right way. My way into this was that when I was at school, I wasn't planning a career. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. Absolutely no idea. I mean, clearly the centre forward option being shut down pretty hard. But I hadn't thought about that. I mean, it wasn't that I was going around moping, thinking that's it with me and Everton. I was 4. I mean, I didn't know where Everton was. That crossed my mind. It was just my dad, had a view. He told me later on. But I was just doing what was in front of me when I was at school. I mean, this is Liverpool in the 1950s and 1960s. My big preoccupation was the Beatles. I was 13 when Love Me Do came out, and it's hard to convey the excitement that band created, not just globally, but especially in Liverpool. I mean, every record they came out with was an event, and it was, it was the 1960s. There was a lot of stuff going on there, and as we became teenagers, there was all the growth of the counterculture, what was happening in Vietnam, rock music and social turmoil. It was all of that, So I didn't know what I was going to do at all. I was just getting through school and hanging out, and and enjoying being with the family. And at one point, I remember I sent off for the application forms to become a manager at the I think it was the National and Provincial Bank. I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought, I don't know, go and work in a bank or something, or I'll go into a management program. But when I was at school, I started for this. Again, I've written about it, but I started with some friends of mine to put plays on. We didn't put plays on at school. We read plays. That's part of the academic thing. You treat a play script as a piece of literature rather than a performance. So we studied plays, but we didn't act in them. So the group of us decided we wanted to put some plays on. And the short version of this is I ended up directing them. And I really enjoyed it. And they did. And we not only put the plays on, we printed the tickets, we sold the tickets, we booked the set, we went around selling tickets door to door. And we did for 4 years, I think it was. Maybe it was 3. The last 2 years at school, and then we did it the summer after school. We came back and put another play on. And that was a really engaging and formative experience for me. It wasn't a single career in it. I just really enjoyed doing it. But I then applied on the advice of the school head teacher to a college called Bretton Hall in Yorkshire, where I could train to be a teacher, and because he thought I'd make a great teacher, and that I could study English and theatre, which is what I did. Again, with no long-term view. I took him at his word. He said, "I think you'd be a wonderful teacher. Have you thought of doing this?" And I thought, nope. So I applied to this college and I was accepted. And I'm saying this not because I think people ought to be fascinated in my biography, but because I think that's how this often works. It's like mentors, heroes. When you ask about my heroes, the Beatles, absolutely, up on a plinth. Absolutely. And I've got to meet Paul McCartney. I had dinner a few weeks back with Ringo Starr. I have got to meet some of my heroes. And not just them, but others besides, intellectual heroes and sporting heroes. It's been one of the good fortunes of my life that I've met people that I've admired hugely. And they have not disappointed for the most part. But it's like that. And this idea, I've often talked about it, that life is linear, is plainly nonsense. The idea that, I often ask audiences as I go around these days, to put their hands up if they're doing now exactly what they thought they'd be doing when they were 15. Nobody. What happens is you come to write your CV, your resume, as we say in America now, and you have to set this thing out on 2 sides of paper. So you put key dates in and pick some things out in bold and some in italics, and the whole idea is to try and convey that you have been conforming to this strict strategic plan that you composed in your late teens, and that here you are as night follows the day now, running a bird sanctuary in Bali, as you know is intended, and of course it's not like that at all. Your life is a constant process of improvisation. It's what's the next thing, or you do something because you can't not do it, and you turn away from it because you're too worried about doing it. It's like you with your kids. You decide, I'm going to take off and we're just going to do this. And now you're doing it. It looks like it was the most natural thing in the world, but it's a huge heave to do that. And most people don't do what you've done. And there are all kinds of things you have to take on board. But no, it's like you said, you saw the talk I gave, or you read a book, and then they try to trigger something. You didn't wake up that morning thinking that was going to happen. It's about being open to possibilities and seeing what could be if you kind of went down that path. And sometimes people open doors for you didn't even know they were there, as I said earlier. So now that's, I think that's just the natural way of it, that we create our life as we live it. And so when I was at school, I wasn't thinking about these things. I was doing plays. I got to this college because it's just I should, and I loved it. It was 1968. It was a Georgian mansion in the middle of the Yorkshire countryside. There were 700 students. There were 2/3 women, 1/3 men. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? And it was great. And it was a time when higher education was paid for by your local education authority. So it was no burden on my family for me to be there. And I met fascinating people. And over the course of that, I became interested in why drama wasn't more commonly taught in schools, or why it was low status when it was. And that led over the next several years. After I left college, I did a PhD in that area because it was of interest to me personally. I didn't think it was going to take me anywhere. It was just a personal Everest I wanted to climb. But I then, during the course of research for it, I got a job and I met other people, and it all started to open out. And I got very interested in the arts overall in education, not just theatre. And I wrote a report with others in the early 80s, called The Arts and Schools, which was a concerted attempt. It became a very successful statement in the end. But it was a concerted attempt to set out why it's of equal importance in education that children should practice and study the arts as they should the sciences and the humanities and languages and mathematics. And it became important to say that because in most school systems, the arts are not equally important. And even in the arts, there's a hierarchy, as I said in the TED Talk, that art and music are normally seen as more important where they're taught at all, are more important than theatre and dance. It's like your kids saying in school in France, they get 45 minutes of art a week. I bet they do a lot more mathematics than that. And so why is that? Why do we think of it that way? So we wrote this report called The Arts and Schools for the Gulbenkian Foundation. It had a big impact. And among the reasons that the arts mattered, among the reasons I believe they mattered, is because of their roles in the development of creative intelligence. It's not the reason the arts matter. It's one of the reasons they matter. It's not, the arts don't matter because they're the creative bit of the curriculum. They matter for all kinds of reasons, one of which is they develop certain aspects of our creative intelligence. But they have a big role in a broader conception of intelligence. They have a major role in our engagement with the cultural traditions, norms, and vitality of the world that we're part of. They have a major role in helping us to engage with and formulate our feelings about the world. But I've always been very keen to say too, that's not the same thing as saying that the arts are the emotional bit of education. They're not. Science affects the way we feel. The arts also affect how we think. It's a much more complex equation than simply that. But we try to set out in this report all the different ways in which the arts matter and how they connect to all the other parts of the curriculum. And it's interesting because outside of education, people aren't so troubled by these distinctions. Only in schools where we decide, well, we're going to do art on a Thursday and science on a Tuesday. And so we have to make sure that they're different. And actually they're connected in all kinds of ways, which is surprising. So, but when the Labour government got in 1997 in the UK and continued the assault, I think, on a broader curriculum, it was time really to say something more concerted about creativity, because the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair, kept making speeches about the importance of creativity, and then was, with the Secretary for Education at the time, presiding over education policies which seemed custom-made to suppress it. So this seemed to me to be a contradiction that should be pointed out to them. And the upshot was that I and others approached the government and said, look, if you're serious about creativity, get serious. And if you're not serious, stop talking about it, because this is confusing everybody. So they asked me if I would convene a group to set out carefully what creativity is, why it matters, and what can be done in schools to cultivate it, which is what I did. And we produced a report called All Our Futures, Creativity, Culture and Education. So at that point, I started to focus specifically on creativity as kind of a set of generic ideas and practices in education. And so, as I see it, there's imagination, which is where this all comes from, which is the capacity to bring into mind things that are not present. And it's a very powerful and unique set of capacities that human beings have. I don't mean that we have it exclusively, but the degree to which we have it is, so far as we can tell, unique among all other species. Creativity is putting imagination to work. It was once described as applied imagination. I think that's pretty good. The difference is you can be imaginative all day long and not do anything. To be creative, you have to do something. The other way to put it is that creativity is the process of having original ideas that have value. And an innovation you could think of as implementing creative ideas in different ways. So an innovation tends to be, it's sometimes as well a kind of more incremental process of change. Not always. So creativity is that. It's the process of having original ideas that have value, and all three bits of it matter. It's about original thinking. It doesn't have to be original to the whole world. You don't have to have an idea that nobody ever had. It has to at least be original to you. It has to put your head into a different place. I mean, I was saying, it wouldn't be right, would it, to take a 5-year-old's drawings, where they're experimenting and come up with things they haven't come up with before, and kind of sneer at them and start showing this kid slides of the roof of the Sistine Chapel, and say, check this out. Don't bother me with this kind of infantile nonsense. The point is, you have to apply relevant criteria to judging it, which is why I'm saying it's about original ideas that have value. So part of it is having fresh ideas that could be new to you, to your community, to your field, maybe to the planet. But a key part of creative work is that you're applying critical judgment to it. Like, is this any good? Does it work? And that's not an abstract idea. It's like when you're writing a sentence, you end up crossing something out saying that's not the right word. Or you're working on a business plan, or you're adjusting the seasoning in a dish. Like, is it right? Is it right? Or you're working on a painting, or you're doing a piece of design, or you're planting stuff in the garden. Always, you're kind of thinking, it's the natural way of it. But a key part of it is knowing what the criteria are to apply. And in the world of invention, for example, in technological innovation, it's often the case that an idea that's really fresh and original to people can stump them. And they can say, oh, what on earth is the point of that? Why would you have that? It was famously said, when mobile phones were being developed, there were people in the telephone industry who were deeply skeptical, saying, why on earth would a person have a telephone number? Why? I remember when emails first came out, I was one of the leading critics. I was confident it would never catch on. It's one of my many devastatingly astute predictions about the future of technology. You can't tell with these things. So it was once described, creativity was once described as a process of successive approximations. And that's a pretty good way to describe the process of it. But the point about it is that when people say you can't define creativity, it's because they haven't thought about it. You can. I'm not saying that's the only definition. It's the one I find very helpful. But we know quite a bit about how the process works. There's always a bit of mystery in here about where the ideas come from. There's always a bit of mystery about how does consciousness exist in this bag of bones and flesh. So I'm not saying we solved everything, but we know quite a bit about how it works, what stimulates ideas, what prevents them, what can encourage them, how you can evolve and develop them. And it's like we know quite a bit about literacy, but we're still not really quite sure how it is we come to speak. That's why you can't teach a child to do it. I mean, there are people who studied it and know much more than you and I do about it. But there's still an inherent mystery about how all this really happens in this kind of structure. But we know enough about creativity to know how much it matters, how much it's the heart of human experience, how our collective creativity gives rise to what we call culture, our common ways of seeing the world in communities which are mutually influential and internally influential. So it's why we call the report All Our Futures, Creativity, Culture and Education, because the three are all intermingled.